ETF Inspector. It's Friday, May 23rd, and you know what that means. It's payday, not just from your job, but also from YieldMax. So this video, we will be going over the trades and holdings for ULTY, YieldMax's Ultra Option Income Strategy ETF, and LFGY, YieldMax's Crypto Industry and Tech Portfolio Option Income ETF. Before we get into the spreadsheets, we'll just take a quick glance overall. So as far as ULTY is concerned, it ended flat on the day, 610. We'll go line by line in the sheet, but the biggest gainer on the day was Oklo, up 23.04%, and the biggest loser was Webull, down 8.89%. And just in case I forget, on the back half of the video for LFGY, they actually had a rough day, down to 39.45, and their biggest gainer was GameStop, up a little over 7%, I think. Yep. And biggest loser was MicroStrategy, or just Strategy. They're up on this other grouping, down 7.5%. So whole lot of red on the screen, a little bit of green sprinkled in. Let's take a look at how we did. We'll start with ULTY, and we're going to start with the trades because they're going to affect what we talk about on the holdings. All right, so we went to YieldMax's website, downloaded the intraday trades, and of course on Friday it's all the trades. So as far as ULTY is concerned, let's see, we started on line 337 and made it to 385, so that's actually not a terrible Friday. LFGY started on line 390 and went to 465, so about 75 lines worth of data on that one. So we got a lot to go over, but in general, we'll be able to go quick because it's just closing out the Friday positions and opening next week's. So before we get into the options trades, they sold their entire position in Webull, so collected $8.7 million. Not, as always, I don't know if you're new to these videos, but we're not counting that as options income, right? They just decided they're done trading Webull, so they closed it back out. We actually didn't stay in that very long. It was maybe last week that we started, maybe a week and a half. And then for some reason, they just added 500 contracts of Rigetti. So again, like if you're new here, we're going to go over all the trades they made, and we'll look at the holdings. We'll look at how far in or out of the money they are. It's the end of the week, so we don't actually get the updated holdings till tomorrow. So over the weekend, I will end up making a week look ahead for the following week that's got all the updated information, as well as guesstimates on what we think the distributions will be for these weekly pairs. Okay, so as far as the trades on Webull, all they did was buy to close the positions that they had, and I think they had a feeling they were going to be doing this because they had sold the puts that were associated with them yesterday and just left these calls. So they closed them out today. They were winners. It looks like a loss, right? 35,000, but that's if you're closing out 3,000 contracts at 5 cents and 4,000 contracts at 5 cents. They obviously didn't sell them for 5 cents. And in an effort to keep the video from getting too long, I'm not going to scroll back up. We've got all the previous trades hidden between lines 273 and 671 because we've already talked about them in previous videos. But so their wins, but on the day it looks like we had to spend $35,000 to close it. Coinbase closed out the May 23rd, 28th, opened May 30th, 27.50. So they only came down about 50 cents. Closed them for 16 cents. That's a win. Sold the new ones for 4.40. Overall profit of roughly $145,000. Robinhood, same thing. Closed out Friday's 66s, opened up next Friday's 67s, closed for 16 cents, opened for $1.11. I'm not going to talk about the puts. They're just there for protection, right? So they just pay a little bit to protect their shares, because this is what some people call a collar strategy, but it's unlike some of the other YieldMax funds. They don't create a synthetic position. They actually buy the shares and then trade the maximum amount of contracts off of the shares they own. So they protect those shares from going down while trying to make money selling calls out of the money on the other side. So Hood gained 45,000 in trades. Mara closed out Friday's. Are they a $17 or $175? $17, 17.50s for a penny. Big win. Sold 16s for next week, 31 cents. Overall gain of 81,000. MicroStrategy had a really rough couple of days lately, but that helped because these were in the money and they were going to hurt, and then instead we got to close them for 30 cents and 11 cents. Opened up next week's at 41, bringing in between 457 and 475 per share, so that's nice. Overall profit of 57,000 on the roll. Oklo, we closed this week's 42.50s. Of course, they were the big winner today. They went up 23%. That hurt us a lot. If it hadn't have done that, we would have been closing these out as winners. Instead, closed them out as losers. So that cost us $1.6 million and basically ruined our whole trading day. Rigetti closed out these 13s. I want to say they actually had a decent day. Yeah, they went up. We were doing okay. We were going to close them out somewhat cheap. Still not terrible. Overall loss of 74,000. Sold next week's calls for 15. Snowflake. This one was a little bit odd, right? They closed out this week's, sold their call out till next Friday, and bought their put out till the weekend, or to the Friday after that, June 6th. Overall loss of $80,000. I'm not sure why they wanted to pay extra for a 2-week put, but maybe big picture it's going to save them not having to buy it twice. So these cost a little too much to close, but what can you do? Tesla closed out their $360 calls and opened 355s for next week. Big win. Only paid 20 cents to close them. Opened the new ones, collecting $4.38 a share, $117,000 profit. Vertiv, we closed out this week's 109s. Is that right? Sorry. Yep. Closed out this week's 109s for 2 cents a share. That's a win. Sold next week's 108s for 105, making about 25,000. And Vistra Corp closed out the 160s for this week at 34 cents. Opened 165s next week for 178. Paid a lot of money for the puts though. 143 as opposed to 139. So not sure why those puts were so expensive. But we made 15,000. So if we scroll up, overall we lost $1.3 million on trades, basically on rolling, and it's pretty much all Oklo's fault. Okay. Now on to the holdings. So a portion of the positions had already been rolled to next week, so we'll still talk about them, how they moved in and out of the money. But any of the stocks that we just talked about that got rolled, there's no reason to talk about how far in or out of the money those options are, because it's already after close on Friday, so these don't matter. So, okay, C3.ai lost a fraction to 22.72. The calls for next week, 25.50, are 12% out of the money. AST Space Mobile lost 1.27 to 24.10. Next week's $26 calls are almost 8% out of the money. That was a loss of $147,000 in value. Now, all these losses I'm going to talk about are not realized, because you would have to sell the shares to actually realize the loss. This is just change in market value. Webull, so I started to say we don't know where they sold. So let's see, 12:30. Did they do better than that? So they got 12:45. So they picked a better time to close out than wait until the end of the day. So lost around $840,000 on the day. Obviously, they didn't lose the full amount because they didn't lose that last 15%. But we're done talking about Webull. Coinbase lost 3.23% to 263.16. We already talked about the trades. Loss of $400,000 in value. CoreWeave went up 2.5% to 102.74. That was a gain of $300,000 in value. And our next week's 110 and 112 calls are still 7 and 9% out of the money. Sorry, taking a quick drink. Dell up 0.14% to 112.11, $11,000 gain. These have always been out to next week because we just started this position this week. 120 is the call strike, and they're 7% out of the money. First Solar was already pushed out the next week. 175s are 10.5% out of the money. They went up 1.3% today to 158.38, a gain of $91,000 in value. Hims and Hers up almost 2.5% to 54.83. The calls are still 11% out of the money for next week at 61, $262,000 increase. Robinhood lost about 2.5% to 63.17. That's a $347,000 loss of value. These got rolled. Next week's that were already open are still 6% out of the money. IonQ, this one took my lunch money this week. Lost 0.22% to 45.69. A loss of $32,500 on the day, and they had already rolled these out, so the 47s are 2.87% out of the money. Mara Holdings lost 5.88% to 14.73, a loss of $575,000. These already got rolled. Marvell Technology down 1.88% to 60.69, $145,000 loss. Next week's calls at 67 are 10.4% out of the money. Strategy, I don't know why it still comes up as MicroStrategy on the holding sheet, but when you look it up, it's just Strategy. But they lost 7.5%. That's a $1.1 million loss in value. 369.51 is the closing price. Most of these got rolled. Next week's 420s that were already open are still 13.66% out of the money. NVIDIA lost 1.16% to 131.29. $200,000 loss, 9% out of the money on next week's 144 strike price on the calls. Oklo was the big winner, 23% increase, 48.87 is the closing price, a gain of $2.7 million in value. So let's see, they ended at 48.87. What did we roll those to? 55. Okay, so they'll be nice and safe to start anyway. Palantir already got rolled earlier in the week, so they went up 0.83%, $134,000 gain, $123.31 was the closing price, and all of next week's calls are out of the money, 2, 5, and 6%, 126, 130, and 131. Reddit up about 2.5% to $100.76, $244,000 gained, 6% out of the money on next week's 107s. Rigetti up 1.15%, $104,000 increase, closing at 1402. The 23rd was rolled the next week, and they're in trouble on the 12s that they have sold out till next Friday because they're already $2 in the money, or 14%. Let's see what they went with, Rigetti. So they sold 5 more 12s but then the vast majority, they sold 15s. So at least the 15s will start out of the money, only by $1. RH lost 1.27% to 184.88, a $48,000 loss. Next week's 195s are 5.5% out of the money. SMCI lost almost 3% to 40.09, $166,000 loss in value. 17% out of the money on those $47 calls. Snowflake lost 1.5% to $200.05, $140,000 loss. These got rolled, so they should have most likely rolled them as winners. So it was actually a good day. On closing day, dropping back down to within 5 cents of the strike on your calls. TNA, the first triple leverage fund they have, lost 1.13% or 116,000. 28.11 was the closing price. Next week's calls at 30 and 32.50 are 6.7 and 15.6% out of the money. The other triple leverage funds, ProShares Ultra Pro QQQ, lost 2.88% to 66.32, nearly a $500,000 loss. Next week's calls are 8.5 and 10% out of the money. Tesla lost 0.5% to 339.34, $78,000 loss in value. These options got rolled, so we don't have the current info. Upstart lost 0.81% to 45.26, $81,000 loss. Next week's calls are at 47.50 and 48.50. They're nearly 5% and 7% out of the money. Vertiv lost a fraction to 104.14, $4,000 loss. Next week's 110 is 5.6% out of the money, and Vistra Corp 2.2% gain to 158.16, $240,000 win. And next week's 162.50 is 2.7% out of the money. So all that said and done, for how bad of a red day it was to only lose 810,000 in market value is not a bad day at all. All right, so net assets of the fund greatly increased. I think it was only about 2 weeks ago when we were at about 220s. Now we're all the way at 320. So we've gone up $100 million in value. A lot of that is because a lot of people have been buying in. So 1.85 million shares added since yesterday, bringing us up to a little over 53 million outstanding shares. So I think that's just about everything on ULTY. All right, so take a quick break, shake it off, and we'll get into LFGY. Cover them slightly different, but on Friday it might be worth going a little bit deeper. So generally they have so many small trades that they're not all worth talking about, but since it's Friday and they're closing everything and rolling into the next week, there's still way too many little ones to talk about, right? We don't want to go into the details of $400, $500. Sometimes we have $100 ones, $180, $58, right? So we don't need those details, but we'll just talk about big picture gains or losses on the roll to next week. So Bitdeer rolled the next week, made 74,000, and of course, so a big red day is going to equal a lowering in market value, but usually a win on most of your trades. Now, obviously, if something explodes and costs you a lot of money, that could end up making things look bad, similar to what we just talked about on ULTY. If it wasn't for Oklo, we would have made 300,000 instead of losing 1.3 or 1.6. So Bitdeer made 74,000, roll into next week. CleanSpark made 71,000, almost 72,000, rolling to next week. Coinbase made 192,000, roll into next week. I still always forget this one. Core Scientific made 67,000, roll into next week. GameStop was the big winner of the day, so that's what hurt us there. Let's see something real quick. Yeah, so they started the day almost even, maybe slightly in the money, and then they went 7% further in the money. So that would have not been so painful to close if it wasn't for the way things ended today. So we lost 182,000. That kind of wiped out Coin's gains. Robinhood made 43,000. So as you can see, though, the majority of these were closing out 2 cents, 2 cents, 10 cents, 6 cents. So they're doing great on these trades. Every once in a while, one bites them. But so Robinhood made 43,000. Hut 8 Corp made 111,000 closing out. See again, buy to close 3 cents. That's a win. Mara made 147,000. Closing at 2 cents and 1 cent. That's beautiful. But they're not getting a ton of money for them, right? 27 cents, 26 cents. So that's not a big payer. MBTX, I always forget the terminology there. Oh, it's tied in with this one. Hang on, I have it. I'm sure all the crypto people are cringing right now. Yeah, it's the mini Bitcoin. Chicago Board Options Exchange. Okay. So that one, the reason I forget that one all the time is because they don't actually hold any shares of it. They only trade options without owning the shares. So made $2,000 on that. Mercado Libre, that's the really high-dollared one, 26, 2,700. They had a bad day today. They must have closed these pretty early in the day because these were 26.60s and they paid $1.36 to close them. And if you look at what they ended at, 2,500. So those should have been pennies. They must have closed them real early or real high. But either way, still, right? So they closed them for $1.36 and they open next week's for $11 and $22 a share. So $31,000 gain. MicroStrategy had a bad day, made for some cheap closeouts, still able to roll well, $166,000 gain. NU Holdings, they made $200. Nvidia, they made $200. They didn't have anything to close out on either of these. They just sold a little bit more. But they're selling selling calls for next week for 7 cents. Opera, same thing. Selling calls 23 cents, $200. So PayPal, they made 18,000 rolling the next week, closing out for 2 cents, opening up for 39 and 41. That's a win. Riot closing for 1 cent and 2 cent, opening for 15 to 17, $83,000 win. Tesla 790, just selling a couple more contracts. And XYZ Block made 17,000, closing out for 8 cents, opening for 87 and 68. And of course, so these guys, they don't do the collars where they sell a call and then buy a put. They do mostly call spreads where they sell a call out of the money and then buy a call further out of the money. So it protects on the upside against it getting blown through. It limits the loss, but it doesn't protect your shares themselves with the value dropping. So overall, trading today, they made $845,000. So heck of a week trading. 500,000, 42,000, 115,000, 1.3 million, and 845,000. So they did great, winning every day on their trades. Share values, not the same story, right? Lost 3.5 million there, 1.8 million there. So we'll take a look at that. But if it was only paying out based off of what they made, now these were based off of the 28 million or 2.8 million. So there's only 75,000 more shares. We'll see tomorrow when we get the update if there was any more shares, because over the weekend and they start doing all their math for figuring out their distribution. So we'll get those numbers and we'll make a distribution guesstimate on either Sunday or Monday. We'll see. So if we look at the holdings, same thing. If I put yellow here, it already got rolled, so there's no reason talking about percentages in or out of the money. BitDeer lost 4% to 1446, a loss of 193,000. CleanSpark lost 5% to 936, a loss of 262,000. They do have some next week's calls that are 28% out of the money. I'd look for them to possibly close them and bring them closer to try to make more money on them next week. Coinbase lost 3.2% to 263.16, over $500,000 loss. Core Scientific lost 1.39% to 1068. They still have a call at 12 till next Friday at 12% out of the money. $79,000 loss. GameStop was the big winner today. These got rolled, but they made $355,000 on that 7% increase to 33.03. Robinhood lost about 2.5% to 63.17. 148,000 loss in value. We got a red light here. Some in the money, some close, and some out. But these two got closed out. So they're 12% out of the money on next week's 71s. Hut 8 Corp lost 2.5% to 16.65, $143,000 loss. iBit, they don't do options on. They just own the ETF, right? Lost 2.2% to 61.83. So that's a $250,000 loss. Mara lost another $500,000 with a 5.88% loss at 14.73. So this one looks funny because there's no MBTX holding itself. It's just the options. So these lines right here go with this price. So that ended at 257.49. Their calls out till June 20th are less than 1% out of the money. So they'll be sweating that one for a while. Mercado Libre lost 3.77% to just over 2,500, $200,000 loss. MicroStrategy lost basically $1 million, coming in as the big loser for the day on this fund, 369.51. NU Holdings lost 2.12% to 11.99. They've already rolled to next week 13, 8.4% out of the money, $94,000 loss. NVIDIA 1.16% loss to 131.29, 34,000 lost in the fund value, that is 8% out of the money on next week's 142 calls. Almost done. Opera 2.63% loss to $17.37. Next week's calls at 20 are 15% out of the money. Lost 120,000 in value. PayPal lost 73,000 in value with a 2.25% loss to 69.85. Those got rolled. Riots got rolled. They lost 4.3% to 8.55. 216,000 lost. Tesla lost 0.5%, 339.34. Next week's 360 and 372.50 are 6 and 9.7% out of the money. Only a $27,000 loss. So this Tesla's, it's almost 5% of the fund. It's only 0.5%. That's why. Hemblock gained 0.67% to 58.74, $17,000 gain. Next week's 59s are starting just about in the money. So overall, on that big red day, we lost $3.5 million in value. The fund is up to $116 million. There's 2.8 million outstanding shares. And so that NAV will update tomorrow when I'm able to get all these prices updated. So rough day. Basically lost over $1 from yesterday. But Okay, that's everything. So if you made it this far, you've earned a dad joke of the day. So before I tell it, I just want to say thank you. Thanks for watching. Thanks for everything, likes, comments. I get lots of feedback, lots of suggestions. I've implemented a bunch of them. So if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me. It doesn't cost you anything, and then you don't have to look through and try to find the most recent video. You'll just get a little green or blue dot next to your subscription on your homepage that lets you know I put out a video. So, okay, dad joke of the day. Don't worry if you miss a gym session. Everything will work out. Yeah, that was pretty cheesy. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great Memorial Day weekend.